scriptures with you, and I hope you do. Turn with me to Paul's letter to the Ephesians. Paul's letter to the Ephesians, chapter 6. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, 1st, 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians. I'm just stopping where I got to go. Ephesians chapter 6, beginning with verse 1. Children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you, and that you may enjoy long life on the earth. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. May God bless the reading of His Word. Now, over the years, there have been many essays written on fathers. We like to talk about our dads. We like to remember phrases and little things that were a common part of his conversations with us. Many of these have been said by dads you know. Many, even you. Everyone's favorite. This is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. Which is wrong. Sit down and watch the game. You can't do that, go somewhere else. Don't forget to check the oil. My dad never said that to me. He said, bring it back with the same amount of gas left. Bring back all the change. Ask your mother. You will have fun. We'll make it a memory here. If you break your leg, don't come running to me. Don't let your mother catch you. Quit playing with food. Quiet. When I want your opinion, I'll ask for it. Because I said so. And that's good enough. I was not asleep. I was just resting my eyes. I could go on like that all morning. Being a parent and a father is an interesting experience. One that is most often fulfilling and sometimes trying. One philosopher said that parents spend the first part of their child's life waiting and urging and hoping that they'll talk and they'll walk, and the rest of their childhood telling them to sit down and quiet. We've went through some times. Society is constantly shifting their opinion on how a dad is supposed to interact with his children. And sometimes we find ourselves coming up on the short side of getting these relationships correct. Both parenting and fatherhood can be a real trial, but it's also a real blessing. Children, obey your parents, for this is right. Honor your father and mother, which is the first commandment with a promise, so that it may go well with you, that you may enjoy long life. Paul has been writing in this section on how each member of the family needs to interact with the other. There's a little blurb about how wives interact with their husbands, about how husbands interact with their wives. After this, we go straight from children to slaves. I'm not sure if there's anything there. But first, we have just a little blurb for the children. Honor your father and mother. But that's something for us to address on Children's Day. We have one of those, right? Mother's Day, Father's Day, Baby's Day. Got to be a Children's Day as well. But moving on, Father, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and the instruction of the Lord. I'll be honest with you. That could be a very exasperating set of instructions. As fathers, we are often placed in an unenviable position of having to deal with the thoughts and dreams of 12 to 18-year-olds. Really, up until about 12, our dealings with our children are pretty straightforward. Once they hit 12, somehow hormones get in their brains, and life is a lot different. People are being torn in many directions. And even the best of our children can make choices that, well, we find questionable and maybe hard to understand. Paul tells us that in the midst of all of that, we are not to exasperate our children. And that is a task that takes true guidance from the Lord. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. Well, if we're going to try to get this right, dads, the first thing we need to look at is the word exasperate. Because for the most part, we don't really understand that word. We know what we think it means. Many of us seem to believe that the meaning of exasperate is to annoy somebody. Most likely for no reason at all. Just because we can. But the truth is, well, yes, to exasperate by definition means to annoy them. But there's a second part of that. The dictionary says that to exasperate is to annoy someone because we do not have the ability to solve the problem that's bothering them. This isn't just about us annoying our kids, because we're going to do that just by being us. But fathers are being called on to help their children solve the problems that life has put in their pathway. Dads, we don't always have the answers. Hence that little phrase in the first section of the sermon, ask your mother. We don't always have the answers, but we complete the first part of this task. Do not exasperate your children by always being available with the answers we have. And by sharing with our children the guidance that God has given us. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. I want you to know that I fully and completely believe that teenagers are incredible creatures. I actually love being around teenagers. I love going to quiz meets and Celebrate Life and all these places where teenagers are, because they never fail to amaze me. Sometimes in ways that I had absolutely no idea were possible. I understand this. I was a teenager once, a long time ago. Even though I pulled out a little bit of my old teenager self the other day. Laura's teaching a class on Thursday night, and while she was teaching, I was in the living room and I was reading a book and watching a movie and listening to Cyndi Lauper on my phone. in my classroom while my teachers taught. Well, that's not always true. In my math classrooms, I did the homework while the teacher was lecturing. And then when they made the assignment, I read my book. I liked math. But, you know, the truth is, my dad spent a lot of time telling me, Steve, pay attention to what you're doing. I'm still not sure I understand why he was always telling me that. Usually it seemed to have something to do with the Pepsi I was pouring while I was being distracted by the television or what was happening outside his window. Dad wanted my full attention all the time. My full attention was never given to much of anything all the time until I started dating. Whatever the reason, I seemed to hear that phrase a lot. And we are called upon by Paul to train up our children. And again, we have a confusion of understanding the word. We read the word train, but in your mind, you immediately changed it to educate, didn't you? Think about that for a moment. You immediately changed train to educate. Training is not simply education. Training is instructing a child in how they're expected to do things in life. We show our children how we, and God, expect them to deal with the things of life. School and work and relationships, dating, driving a car, all those things. Training is something more than just a 1-minute question and answer session. For most of us, training entails repetition. Going over something over and over and over and over and over again until the proper way to do it has become engraved on our minds in such a way that it becomes second nature. This is why when your kids look at you and go, why do you do it that way? If you, somewhere along the line you were trained. And you say one of two things. Either that's the way my dad did it, or it's just the way I do it. Because you don't have any idea who trained you how to do it that way. Training doesn't just happen. It can. Your kids can learn things you never wanted them to learn because you trained them. But training normally doesn't just happen. It's something we work for, something we plan for. It's what we're called to do for our children. And sometimes training is completely hands-on. You got to be right in the middle of it. You got to be showing them how it's done. You got to be helping them along, fixing the problems after they mess it up. Other times, training is just using your ability to press upon your children the proper manner of doing something. My kids were growing up, they got trained. So many ways. One of the things I'll ask questions. If you want to know something, ask questions. Don't just wander around moping. Ask a question. Okay? And so they would ask me, but so many times they did not get the answers they were looking for. Hey, Dad, how do you spell? Dictionaries in the bookcase start with the letter A-G. Figure it out. You know how to do that. Hey, the answer that they gave me back was, no, I don't think so. Training can take many forms. We're called upon to invest ourselves in our children through training. Training never ends. Just because your child becomes a man or a woman, it doesn't mean that they don't need training. There are still times where you have to look at them and say, let me show you how to do that. Let me tell you how to do that. Let me help you with that. When you get old enough, they think it's cute, and you can get away with it. Fathers, do not exasperate your children. Instead, bring them up in the training and instruction of the Lord. I read this instruction thing and was trying to figure out exactly how to talk about it. I found an illustration that I used a long time ago, and I liked it enough that I rewrote it and put it in here. One father had told his story about learning to be an instructor. He says, when I was young, baseball was my life. I learned absolutely everything there was to know about baseball. So when my oldest son decided to play baseball, I was so excited. I was so excited because I knew this game inside and out. And I knew it was going to be a way for us to bond. We were going to become close because of baseball. And as I watched him play, I knew so much about baseball that I saw absolutely every mistake he made. And I knew every way to fix it. And so when we get in the car after the game, our trip home would be me explaining to him how if he squared his hips a little better, or if he held his glove in a little different position, or how if he threw the ball overhand instead of sidearm, things would work out so much better for him. I gave him all the instruction I had in me. But it got to be too much for my son. So one night he finally said, Dad, before you start telling me how to fix everything I did wrong tonight, could you just please tell me what I did right? Just once. Tell me what I did right first. In one sentence, this father learned that instruction is important. It's a God-given mandate. But we have to be careful how we deliver it. We have to be careful how we deliver it. We have to ask the question, am I an instructor or am I a coach? Or maybe just a critic? So many times, we feel like failures. But dads, we love you. We love you. And we thank you today for all you've done and all that you're trying to do for us. And this is a letter to Dad I found. There are so many things I'd like to tell you face to face. I either lack the words or fail to find the time and place. But in this letter, Dad, you'll find, at least in part, the feelings that the past years have left within my heart. The memories of childhood days and all that you've been, to make our home a happy place. And growing up, so much fun. I still recall the walks we took, the games we often played, the confidential chats we had while resting in the shade. This letter comes to thank you and give needed words of praise, the counsel and the guidance too that shaped my grown-up days. No words of mine can tell you, Dad, the things I really feel, but you You must know my love for you is lasting, warm, and real. You made my world a better place, and through the coming years, I'll keep these memories of you as cherished souvenirs.